62 years of living. And I never thought the moment that would break me open would happen in the waiting area of a tire shop off Route 9. I was sitting in a plastic chair the color of old mustard, holding a paper cup of bad coffee, watching a rerun of some home renovation show on a wall-mounted TV nobody had asked for. My truck's in the bay. Routine rotation and balance. I had nowhere to be for another 40 minutes. That's the thing about being retired. You stop rushing. You stop checking your watch every 3 minutes. You just sit. You wait. You let the world move around you at whatever pace it wants. I'd gotten good at that over the past 2 years. Maybe too good. My wife had been the one who noticed it first, the way I'd gotten quieter. She said I was fading. I told her I was finally resting. We didn't argue about it the way we used to argue, which should have told me something. After 34 years of marriage, we'd developed our own language of silences. I thought I knew what hers meant. I was wrong about a lot of things that fall. Her name is Diane, my wife. We met at a church picnic in 1989 in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. She was wearing a yellow sundress and arguing with her cousin about whether coleslaw needed sugar in it. I stood nearby, pretending to look at the dessert table and listening to her talk. She had this way of making even a disagreement feel warm. Like she was enjoying herself. Like she was glad to be alive and present in that exact moment. I thought about that sundress a lot in the weeks after what happened at the tire shop. We built everything together. The house in Westerville, the savings, 2 kids, both grown now. Our son lives in Denver, our daughter about 20 minutes from us, which was a blessing more than I ever said out loud. Diane had her own bookkeeping business for 15 years before she closed it down. I retired from 31 years in commercial insurance. We weren't rich, but we were solid. We'd worked for solid. The retirement hit me harder than I expected. I don't think I understood how much of my identity had been tied to being useful somewhere. Having a desk to go to, problems to solve that had my name on them. When that stopped, I drifted a little, started taking longer on simple things, forgetting where I'd put my phone, my keys, whether I'd taken my blood pressure pill. Small things. Normal things, the doctor said, consistent with my age. Nothing alarming, but I noticed Diane noticing. She started doing this thing where she'd repeat information twice, not lecturing, just gently. The dentist is Tuesday, honey. Tuesday at 2, as if making sure it landed. At first I thought she was being helpful. Then I thought she was being nervous. I didn't ask which one because I didn't want to have that conversation. There's a kind of peace in not asking questions you're not ready to hear the answers to. I know that now for what it was. Avoidance. Our son-in-law is a man I'll call someone I was never entirely sure about. His name is Marcus. He and my daughter have been married 6 years. He's not a bad person. I want to be fair about that, even now. But he's the kind of man who's always calculating, always measuring the angle of things. He sells commercial real estate, and I think that business gets into obsession after a while. He started coming around more in those months, offering to help with the yard. Staying for dinner on nights he hadn't been invited to stay. I noticed, but I didn't say anything because my daughter seemed happy. That was my first mistake. It was a Thursday in October. The leaves were down early that year because we'd had a bad wind in September. I drove my truck to the Goodyear on Route 9 at 9 in the morning, dropped the keys with the desk guy. Young kid named something I can't remember, and settled in to wait. There was one other person in the waiting area when I sat down. An older woman, mid-70s maybe, working a crossword puzzle. We nodded at each other the way strangers in waiting rooms do, acknowledging the shared inconvenience. About 15 minutes in, a man came through the side door, the one that connects the waiting area to the service manager's office. I'd talked to him when I checked in. His name was Lou, maybe late 50s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of face that looked like it had seen a lot without making a production of it. He was the service manager, I'd found out from the guy at the desk. Lou walked past me toward the coffee machine. He poured himself a cup, then paused and looked at me. "You here for the F-150? "That's me," I said. He nodded, looked toward the parking lot through the glass. Then he looked back at me. "You got a wife, Diane?" I felt my stomach shift the way it does when something is about to go wrong and your body knows it before your brain catches up. "Yeah," I said. "That's my wife." He pulled a chair out from against the wall, one of those extra chairs that nobody ever sits in, and he dragged it over and sat down across from me. He leaned his elbows on his knees and kept his voice low. "I've been going back and forth about this since I saw your name on the work order," he said. "I know your wife from church. St. Andrew's over on Fishinger. We go there too," I said. "Went. We used to go more regularly." "I know. I've seen you. I want you to understand something before I say what I'm about to say. I'm not a gossip. I'm not someone who enjoys this. But I've been in a situation before where somebody should have said something and didn't, and I've never made peace with being that person." He set his coffee down. "Your wife came in here about 3 weeks ago. Had her Camry in for an oil change. I don't usually work the front counter, but we were short-staffed, and I was covering. She came in with a man. I didn't say anything. They sat right where you're sitting. I was in the back office most of the time. The window is one-way glass for security purposes. Company policy lets us keep an eye on the floor. I wasn't watching them on purpose. But I heard them talking. They didn't know anyone was close enough." He stopped, looked at me like he was giving me a moment to decide if I wanted him to continue. "Tell me," I said. He told me. What Lou described was a conversation that lasted about 20 minutes. My wife and Marcus, my son-in-law, sitting in those same plastic chairs, talking in the way people talk when they think they're alone. The conversation was about me, about the forgetting, about the way I'd gotten slower. Marcus apparently had done some research. He used a term Lou didn't recognize, something about a cognitive assessment, a power of attorney process. He'd spoken to someone, Lou said. A financial planner or an attorney, he wasn't certain. He'd been gathering information. And Diane had been listening, not objecting, asking questions. At one point, Marcus apparently said something like, "Once it's in place, the decisions on the house, the accounts, none of it needs to go through him anymore. It just needs to be documented right," Diane had said. "He won't understand it until it's already done." Lou stopped talking. He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't have any way to make that easier." I set my paper coffee cup down on the plastic side table next to me, very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you don't want anyone to see that. "You're sure about what you heard?" I said. "I've been going over it in my head for 3 weeks," he said. "I haven't misremembered it." I looked at the television on the wall. Some man in a flannel shirt was pulling up old laminate flooring with a pry bar. The show was on mute. He looked very cheerful about it. Did she seem afraid? "Of me?" I asked. It was a strange question, but I needed to understand the shape of the thing I was dealing with. Lou thought about it. She seemed like someone who'd already made a decision and was getting the details sorted out. I nodded slowly. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "I know that wasn't easy." He stood up, picked up his coffee. "Take whatever time you need in here. Your truck'll be another half hour." He went back through the side door. I sat there for a long time with the muted television, and the woman with her crossword puzzle, and the smell of motor oil coming in faintly from the garage. 34 years. That's what I was sitting with. I didn't go home angry. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect a certain kind of story when they hear this. And this wasn't that story. I drove home and I walked in through the garage door like I did every day, and Diane was in the kitchen making chicken soup from scratch, which was something she did every October because she said the smell of it meant fall was properly starting. The whole house smelled like it. onions and thyme and the low warmth of something that had been on the stove for a while. She looked up when I came in and said, "How'd the truck go?" "Fine," I said. "Just the tires. You hungry? Soup won't be ready until lunch." "I'm all right," I said. "I'm going to sit in the study for a bit." She nodded and went back to her pot. I sat in the study for about 3 hours. I didn't make calls. I didn't start writing things down. I just sat in the chair I'd had since 1997, and I thought, the thing about being 62 and having built something with someone for 34 years is that your first instinct isn't anger. Your first instinct is grief. Anger comes later. It has to find its way through all that grief first, and the grief is dense. It's built up over decades of small moments that you thought meant one thing and are now asking you to reconsider. I thought about the way she'd been repeating things to me. The dentist is Tuesday. Honey, Tuesday at 2. I thought about Marcus coming around more. The yard work he'd offered. The dinners. I thought about a conversation Diane and I had had in August, late at night on the back porch, where she'd asked me, very gently, whether I'd thought about what would happen if my memory got worse. I'd said I hadn't really thought about it. She'd nodded and gone inside, and I'd sat out there alone for a while watching the fireflies and feeling, I realized now, like I'd just failed some kind of test. She had been building something, quietly, with my son-in-law, who I had never entirely trusted, in the waiting room of a tire shop off Route 9, while I sat at home thinking everything was fine. The first thing I did the next morning was call my doctor, not because I was panicking, because I needed to know the truth about myself before anyone else got to define it for me. That was the clearest thought I had. Nobody is going to tell me who I am before I know it myself. I made an appointment. I went in. I was up front with him. I said I'd been experiencing some forgetfulness, some difficulty concentrating, and I wanted a full cognitive workup. He referred me to a neurologist. I did not tell Diane about any of this. I also called my own attorney, a man I'd used for estate documents years ago, steady and careful, old enough to understand the full scope of what I was describing without requiring me to spell out every implication. I explained the situation. I said I wanted to review every document with my name on it, joint accounts, property records, any prior power of attorney language, everything. He said he'd have his paralegal start pulling it together within the week. I went home and had dinner with my wife, and I asked her how her day had been, and she told me she'd talked to our daughter and that Marcus was thinking about looking at some new listings out toward Dublin. I said that was interesting. I poured us both a glass of wine. We watched the news together like we always did. I was calm. I want people to understand that word correctly. Calm is not the same as cold. I wasn't detached from what I was feeling. I was holding it. There's a difference. Over the next few weeks, I moved carefully. The neurologist completed her assessment and sat down with me in her office on a gray November morning. She was direct, which I appreciated. She told me that my cognitive function was consistent with normal aging. Some processing speed changes, as expected at my age, but no markers for early dementia, no significant memory impairment. She said the word robust twice, which I almost wanted to write down. I asked her to put it in writing. She did. I brought that letter to my attorney. Then I started looking more carefully at what Marcus had actually been doing. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't need to. What I found through my own records and the help of a financial advisor I'd worked with briefly before retirement. A methodical woman who'd always been straight with me. I called her and explained that I was doing a review of my accounts and needed a second set of eyes. What we found was that over the past year, Diane had been quietly shifting money. Not large amounts, not the kind of transfers that trigger automatic flags. 1,000 here, 1,500 there, into a personal account that I had no access to, and, until that afternoon in the advisor's office, no knowledge of. The total was significant. We were talking about something close to $60,000 over 18 months. My advisor set her pen down very carefully on the desk. "Did you know about this account?" she asked. "No," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You need your attorney in on this conversation." "He already is," I said. I wasn't devastated by the number. That surprised me. What I was devastated by was the timeline. 18 months. She had been doing this for 18 months. That put it at the spring of the previous year, before I'd even fully retired. While we were still planning what the next chapter was going to look like. While she was still kissing me on the cheek when I left for the office, I thought about that yellow sundress again. The coleslaw argument. The way she'd looked glad to be alive. I wondered when that woman had decided to become someone else. I wondered if she'd made a single decision, or if it had been 1,000 small ones, each one feeling reasonable on its own. I told our daughter. That was the hardest conversation I have had in my adult life. She came over on a Sunday afternoon in November. I asked her to come alone, which she thought was strange, but she didn't push it. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework in 1999, where she'd told me she was getting married, where we'd had Christmas breakfast every year since she was old enough to remember. I told her everything, starting with Lou at the tire shop, ending with the account statements. She didn't say anything for a very long time. Then she started to cry. Not loudly. The way adults cry when they're trying not to. The tight, careful kind that costs something. "Marcus told me you'd been struggling," she said finally. "He said he was worried about you. He said Mom was exhausted." "Did you believe him?" She looked at the table. "I believed he was worried about me. That's different." "I know," she said. "I know that now." We sat there for a while. Eventually she asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was still working through it. I told her the most important thing right then was that she knew the truth from me before anyone else got the chance to tell her a version of it. She reached across the table and took my hand. She held it the way she used to hold my hand when she was very small, and we were crossing a parking lot somewhere. I held on. I confronted Diane on a Tuesday evening in late November, after dinner, when the dishes were done and we were in the living room and the TV was off. I'd waited until I had everything documented. My attorney had advised me to wait. I'd waited. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform anything. I just told her that I knew. I laid the account statements on the coffee table between us. I told her I'd had a full cognitive assessment. I told her what Lou had told me. I gave her all of it quietly, the way you give someone their own story back. She didn't deny it. She sat for a long time, and then she said she'd been scared. That she'd watched me slow down and she'd panicked. That Marcus had convinced her that by the time things got bad, it would be too late. That she'd been trying to protect herself. "You were protecting yourself," I said. "Not me." She didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. I slept in the guest room that night. And the night after that, we didn't end in a scene. There was no screaming, no throwing things, nothing dramatic for the neighbors to piece together later. We ended the way long things end. Slowly, with lawyers, with the kind of exhausted precision that comes from having once loved someone enough to know exactly where everything is. The house sold in February. Our accounts were divided legally and cleanly. Marcus and Diane faced consequences that were civil in nature. My attorney used words like financial misconduct and fiduciary breach and made clear that the documentation we had was enough to proceed if I chose to. I chose a settlement. I didn't want to spend years in a courtroom. I wanted it finished. My son came from Denver in December when I told him. He was angry in the way that sons get angry when they feel they should have known something sooner. I told him there was nothing he could have done. I told him the same thing I've been telling myself ever since. You can only work with what you know when you know it. I moved into a condo on the east side of Westerville in the spring. Ground floor, which my knees appreciated. Small enough that I didn't rattle around in it. My daughter helped me unpack. She brought a plant, one of those low-maintenance ones she said was impossible to kill, which she said as a joke and also not as a joke. It sits on my kitchen windowsill now. I still go to St. Andrew's on Sundays sometimes. I've seen Lou there. We shake hands. We've never talked about that day in the tire shop again. We don't need to. Some things don't need to be spoken more than once to matter for a lifetime. There's something people get wrong about this kind of story. They think the ending is about justice, or about being vindicated, or about the other person getting what they deserve. I understand why people want that. I wanted it too, for a while. But what I actually got was clarity. I got a clean cognitive report that said my mind was my own. I got my own accounts and my own name on my own property. I got a Sunday condo with a kitchen that smells like whatever I decide to cook in it. I got my daughter's hand across a table, and my son's voice on the phone calling me every Sunday evening since December without fail. That's what I got. I think about something my father told me once, when I was young and impatient and certain that the world owed me a faster resolution to things. He said, "Waiting is not the same as losing. Sometimes it's the whole strategy." I didn't understand that then. I do now. The plant on my windowsill is doing fine, for the record. Turns out it just needed light and not much else. Most things, if they're going to survive, figure out what they need and quietly get on with it. So do I.